One of the products I get questions on from time to time is Telerik's ORM product. Telerik has basically created their own object relational mapper. They've started with concepts such as entity framework and link and built on top of it to add certain functionality you would expect to have in an end-to-your application. Things like fluent syntax, second-level caching, a lot of wizard-based creation to get you started with their ORM tool. But they've really done a nice job. Unfortunately, once people have gotten Telerik implemented in their application, it's kind of like, where do I go from here? How do I do something more intelligent other than just exposing a bunch of CRUD operations to the world? How do I create lightweight DTOs or data transfer objects so I'm not having to serialize this massive entity and sending it across the wire? And then really, how do I leverage Telerik inside of my application without really breaking anything, using it the way that it's designed to be used, but still adding my own, secret sauce on top of it. So the application I'm going to show you should address a lot of those questions and should give you a pattern that would really help you let you use Telerik for about 90-95% of all of your heavy lifting in your application. So the project we're looking at is a typical end-to-your application. We've got proper separation of layers, data, business, service, etc. And at the heart of the application is the data service layer. Now what you're seeing here is Telerik's entity diagram. This is the same that you would expect from an EDMX diagram, but this is Telerik's version of it. This is where everything kind of starts. This is where you'll go to set settings for second level caching, where you'll set trace settings or logging settings. This is pretty much the same flavor of design that you would expect from something like EF. Now where Telerik differs is in the wizards and the additional functionality that come from this point forward. If we right-click on this diagram, we'll see that one of the options we have is Generate Open Access Domain Model Service. Now what this will do is expose a wizard that will provide us with some hand-holding to create a WCF service, a RESTful service, an ATOM service, to be able to expose a bunch of CRUD operations for our diagram across the wire. Now the wizard itself has a lot of additional functionality in it. Some of the functionality will allow you to do things such as separate the hosting from the service library. The bottom line is that the wizard itself is that next step. So launching that wizard creates these services and lets you have at the end of it a data service that will give you those CRUD operations that you can expose publicly. Now personally, I don't use those CRUD operations across the wire. I use them for back office products, for administrative applications, things that I'm going to keep on my subnet. What I end up exposing to the rest of the world is an action service, something that exposes a bit more intelligence and gives us the ability to have complex messages that we can wrap up a lot of the complex data that we want to send and not just a persistent object or an entity. So if we look at the data service itself, Telerik has gone and generated a lot of the core functionality for us. We've got our interface here, we've got our implementation, we've got some link extension methods in here, and one of the files we're going to be working with is the actual service library. And that service library is where your data transfer objects come from and your assemblers to be able to convert from a persistence object or entity into a DTO. The action service, what we're doing is exposing a couple of methods or a couple of messages to be able to give you an envelope of information, both as a request and a response, so you're not just sending an entity or a primitive piece of data. If we look at the catalog email address operation or request as an example, we'll see that we're passing in just a basic string, and what we're sending back is a data transfer object. Now this DTO is created by Telerik. It's part of that data service library. Again, this is not something I had to create. All I've basically done is made a reference to it here. The same holds true in the fetch resource data operation or message. As you can see, the request really doesn't take anything, but what we're sending back is a collection of country DTOs. And really, if you were to examine this at runtime, what you'll see is this is a hierarchy of objects: country, states, cities, etc. These two messages are used within the actual actions themselves. This is what's exposed to the rest of the world. This is where I'm allowing those messages to come in and sending back those responses. What you'll notice here is we're really just doing a bunch of validation, and we're calling upon a business action to perform the work. Now the business action itself is really nothing special. This is really where we're beginning to tap into Telerik. What we have here is some basic link syntax that's checking the existence of an object and possibly creating one if it's needed. What we're then doing is calling upon one of Telerik's helper objects, the assembler, to convert from the entity object or the persistence object down to a data transfer object. And as you'll see, we call upon this anytime we want to do that transformation from an entity object to a DTO. Again, what's important to note here is I didn't have to create any of the data objects, the persistence objects, or the assemblers. All of that was done by Telerik. Now on that note, I'd like to take a moment to show you a different action, and that's the fetch country hierarchy action. If you recall from the previous example, we were grabbing the objects, we were then calling upon the assembler to do the conversion from the persistence objects to the DTO. We're still doing the exact same thing here, but it's important to note that we have to do a little bit of manhandling ourselves. The downside of using Telerik's assemblers is that it doesn't go any deeper than that current object. During the conversion, Telerik will create the data transfer object and pull the values from the persistence object into the DTO. Unfortunately, it doesn't go any deeper. It doesn't go to the child objects, it doesn't go to new sibling objects. This is where I mentioned you're probably going to have to do the other 5%. This doesn't happen frequently, but in this case where we have a nested object, we're going to have to pull them in. So just to recap, Telerik has taken care of pretty much everything for us. It's created the entity diagram that we would expect. We've used that entity diagram to create our own service library and a separate, again it's optional, but a separate hosting project to be able to separate the two. And it's created all of the data transfer objects, the entities, and the assemblers used to convert from one to the other. Now in this project, our intent is to not expose the data service directly, but instead expose an action service that allow us to wrap those calls in a request and a response object, and then call upon the data service when needed to do the transformation from a persistence object to a data transfer object. The end result is that we have an action service that has that robust intelligence that we're looking for. We've still used Telerik for 90 to 95% of all the heavy lifting and all the data operations. I hope this video has helped get you over that hurdle with Telerik ORM. If you have any questions, my name is Fred Lackey. Feel free to drop me an email at fred.lackey@gmail.com. Thanks a bunch and have a great day.